Motorola, Palm, Nokia, LG, and one of the oldies but goodies, HTC. Why is it so difficult, or was it so difficult for these hardware manufacturers to stay on top?
Each generation brings a different disruption. You have to basically intersect those trends. If you miss the trend in a hyper-competitive market, you get destroyed. When Apple came out, they realized that the killer app was the user interface. They taught people to use the phone differently, and that's what people craved, and everyone missed it. The reason I admire Steve Jobs so much is that he had conviction. You remember he had sold over 400 million iPods, and he realized that the iPod had limited days. So he transformed to the iPhone. He also needed to create that ecosystem and hook them on with all the applications. If you look at what Apple's doing systematically is creating more and more stickiness. Today, for example, if you look at Apple Pay, that's an additional level of stickiness. You get used to Apple Pay, you get used to a number of things, and then you say, okay, switching is too difficult.
You're listening to
Welcome to What the Tech, your gateway to business strategies and tech secrets shaping today's workplace. Dave, I'm going to send you a text message from my BlackBerry right now. Tell me when you get it.
Man, I'm going to have to dig really deep. I know that I still have the BlackBerry that I first bought way back in the day. I think that was the first device that ever had Bluetooth that I ever had that had Bluetooth.
There's one that is before the BlackBerry. And you know what? Today, I want to call him the godfather of Bluetooth. He shared some interesting stories. I hope we can bring some of those out when we're talking with them. And some of it may be reveal when it comes to some of the things he did, Sony Ericsson, at BlackBerry. But nevertheless, these devices, if you're watching us on the video, the BlackBerry was a revolutionary device. But did you know, Dave, there was some interesting developments that came prior to the BlackBerry out of Sony Ericsson. I remember sitting in at a desk and where we did a test. This was before BlackBerries were out. A Sony Ericsson, or Ericsson device as it was called first, an Ericsson device, the T28, and then sitting a Motorola next to it, making a call from each. And in the office, when we did these tests, we found that the sound of the Sony Ericsson, or actually Ericsson, the T28 device, was far superior in audio quality. And it amazed everybody that was in the room with me at the time. Like, how can that be? Well, I've got the guy that can tell us why that is. And we also have the guy who can tell us how some of these developments came to be about Bluetooth. Some of the origin stories around it, some fascinating things that happened prior to the iPhone being released. Hopefully he can share some of that with us today, and a lot of other interesting things on management, how to run a company in a way so that it can grow, it can last, it can be sustainable, and who's the right guy for all of these types of companies? Is there a right type of person, and can you develop them? How do you get ready to maybe in the line of succession move up and do some of that things? Sandeep's got a whole wealth of knowledge, and I'm so glad that he's on the show today.
Yeah, me too.
So, you know what? Without further ado, let's give a proper introduction to Sandeep. All right, here we go. So Sandeep is an author, a lifelong learner, and a technology business enthusiast. His book, Your Company is Your Castle, has proven methods for building a resilient business, and he delves into building robust companies, making him a unique blend of innovation and strategy. You know, Dave, he is, I believe, a mathematician or scientist by trade. If I got that wrong, Sandeep, when you come in, you straighten me out. But that's an interesting blend of knowledge there that he's got. His impressive educational journey includes a postgraduate diploma in industrial management from the esteemed Indiana Institute of Science and a PhD in electrical engineering from SMU, Southern Methodist University. His contributions to the electronics industry have touched billions, Dave, billions of people through technologies like the cell phones, laptops, satellites, more, with 180 patents to his name. Oh, that's an amazing stat within itself. He's held pivotal roles at companies like I mentioned earlier, Ericsson, Sony Ericsson, which is the division between Sony and Ericsson, Freescale, BlackBerry, and AMD. His strategic decisions have shaped industries, Dave. I can't wait for him to share some of that. And he currently serves as the COO of Uhnder. I hope I pronounced that correct, which is a pioneer in digital imaging radar technology. And he also advises exciting tech startups. So without further ado, let's welcome to the podcast, Mr. Sandeep.
Welcome.
Welcome.
Thank you, Rolando and Dave.
How are you today?
I am fine, thank you.
Well, I'm so glad you came on today because at heart, we are a tech company ourselves, not quite the same like what you've worked with, but we've sold a lot of those devices that I mentioned to all kinds of companies now for the last 20 years. And so I'm just fascinated with where you have been, what you've done, and your life's journey through the corporate world, from your start in coming out and working at Sony Ericsson and then BlackBerry and further and further along. Am I doing you justice by calling you the godfather of Bluetooth, or are you too humble to take on that moniker?
No, actually, that's actually incorrect.
Okay, correct me.
The godfather of Bluetooth is Dr. Nils Rydbeck.
Okay.
He was my boss and the CTO at Ericsson Mobile Phones. He's an absolute genius. He lives in Florida today, and he was the one who came up with this concept. He actually wrote down on a napkin. He used to write things down on little pieces of paper and hand out little tasks. And he told me, he said, hey, invent a 10-meter link. And I had a research team, and there were some very bright guys in the research team. There was a guy called Jaap Hartson and another guy called Sven Martisson. They actually did most of the early work and the pioneering work. Now, a number of us in the team also contributed, but really, I think it was Nils Rydbeck's idea, and he came up with his idea with 3 really fantastic use cases.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, look, the first use case is, imagine, in those days, we didn't have Wi-Fi widely deployed. He said, imagine that if you're on a plane, you can use your laptop. Okay, but you have to turn your phone off. When you get off the plane, you can turn your phone on, but your laptop is closed. What if these 2 devices could talk to each other over a short link? So on the plane, you can do email and whatever you want. You close your laptop, put it in your briefcase or in your bag. You get off the plane, you turn on your phone, and they would automatically synchronize with each other, and it'll send off your emails and then load your new emails or whatever messages, whatever, into your laptop. So when you got to your hotel, or if you were business travelers, it would be a real boon.
Right.
Another idea was, hey, what about playing music without wires, stuck to your ears? And the third was hands-free in cars, so that you basically couldn't be distracted. A genius of an idea, and a lot of people contributed, but I think I would give the most credit to Nils and to Jaap Hartson and to Sven Martisson, both very good friends of mine and brilliant people. There are a whole bunch of others in the team.
You were on that team. So calling you the godfather is probably the wrong word, but you were a contributor or player on the team. You were part of the team. So if you were on a soccer team or football team, you were there at the, I would say, at almost the origins of this Bluetooth initiation, this project that got off the ground that now is adopted by the world.
Yeah, I was head of research and advanced development, so these ideas normally came to me to work on, and we were at the same time we were working on 3 super exciting projects. Bluetooth was one. We were also inventing the architecture and the system idea behind 3G for mobile phones.
Wow.
Not on the network side, but the 3G part on the phone side. And at the same time, we were inventing a mobile satellite system. So in the early days, when you had a geostationary satellite trying to provide maritime service, you had big, bulky phones, really big, bulky phones.
Huge.
And we said, how about we can have a typical cell phone size phone with just a special antenna? And could we still make it work? Because it would be so convenient to carry. And that system is called ACES today. And it's used all over Southeast Asia for maritime service. So it was a fantastic period where there was a lot of innovation. And these were 3 of the primary innovations during that decade.
Wow. It's just fascinating. I know that from having some friends that were in that business, and the phones and the terminals were huge. Whether it was Thuraya, whether it was Asus, which used an Ericsson phone, whether you're talking about Inmarsat, again, those big bulky things. This was a solution for a lot of folks that were in need of a product like this. And
Yeah, Thuraya and Asus are probably using the same standard.
Mhm, mhm. And Thuraya came when they first introduced their phone. It was much smaller than other solutions.
That's right, and that is because of the way we architected the standard.
Mm,
There's and it was revolutionary in the 90s, and you had to take into account a lot of considerations on the satellite in order to make sure you could make a phone that small.
right. It is a game changer. I recall. My mother used to work at Cellular One
Hmm.
when cell phones were being rolled out, and it was a big Motorola brick phone that everybody has seen, right? Put it in, it's big, it was heavy, um, and the innovations, like that's why I was talking about the T28. When I looked at that thing, it was as small as this BlackBerry that I have in my hand, and the quality of audio that it could deliver was amazing. The reception on it, again, the reception, it hardly dropped a call. And at that time, in the early 2000s, the networks were still not what they are today, where you've got towers everywhere. So, um, and speaking about cell phones, I want to play a clip for you from from Tesla that has announced the smartphone, and you are the perfect person to give us an understanding of maybe what's going on, or maybe some thoughts as to what's the likelihood that this could succeed, given the uphill battle that you know so well when it comes to this industry, and the graveyard of other players that are there, as well as the current incumbent. So, Ori, go ahead and roll that clip for Sandeep.
And anticipation, the tech world is abuzz with excitement as Elon Musk, the visionary entrepreneur behind Tesla and SpaceX, has finally unveiled the highly awaited Tesla phone Model Pi. Breaking away from the norms of the smartphone industry, Musk's latest creation promises to deliver a revolutionary blend of cutting-edge technology, innovative features, and seamless integration with Tesla's overarching ecosystem.
What are your thoughts on what you just heard?
Well, it's a bold idea. Phones have changed significantly since when we had to build everything ourselves because we were completely vertically integrated. But
Okay.
today, there is an ecosystem that supports third parties building phones. So it's moved away from a technology game into industrial design and brand
Branding
application.
matters. Is that what I hear you saying?
Absolutely. User interface and an application store and a distribution channel, right? And if you have that, it's possible to actually build something that people will buy, especially if it plugs into an ecosystem that you are dependent on and brings you convenience.
Well, I think, if I were to give you a couple of companies along, so Tesla's there for now. I want to put them to the side for a second, because the challenges today may be a little bit different than when some of these companies were around. So I want to ask you, what happened to some of these companies that peaked, and some of them are no longer there? Motorola. What happened to Motorola in 2004 or thereabouts? They peaked. Palm, 2005. Nokia, 2008. LG, around 2009. And one of the oldies but goodies, HTC, if you can remember HTC,
Yes, yes.
2011. Why? Why is it so difficult, or was it so difficult for these hardware manufacturers to stay on top? And do you think that Tesla will have a different path than some of these other companies that I just outlined?
Yeah, I think it comes down to a couple of things. Each generation brings a different disruption, right? And you have to basically intersect those trends. If you miss the trend in a hyper competitive market, you get destroyed. These are like giant waves that just crash and just wash you ashore, and it's very difficult to recover. So, if you take, for example, when Apple came out, they realized that the killer app was the user interface,
Yeah.
and that they realized that people wanted an app store. They taught people to use the phone differently, and that's what people craved, and everyone missed it. And very soon you got used, and there's a certain stickiness when you have applications in a user interface, and stickiness is a barrier which protects you against competition, or in the face of competition people are loath to leave you and your ecosystem. And so they were able to create a high enough barrier for people not to leave. So many of the others, it was, they just didn't offer the same capabilities. In some of them failed because they lost out on distribution
Mm.
and on the economics. The phone business is a very low operating leverage business, meaning that it has high variable cost. Okay, so if you don't have scale and you don't have large enough distribution, you cannot afford the costs of running the business.
So you can't be a niche player in the phone business, in the smartphone business. That's
No,
what I'm
unless
using.
unless it is actually feeding from a bigger business and
Mm.
it is incorporated in it. It's impossible because the margins, for example, let's just do the math, right? Let's assume that a phone company can make a 30% gross margin.
Okay.
Okay. Some Apple probably makes more. But let's say 30%. Okay. When I was running a phone business, that was a good margin. You spend 7% on R&D to remain competitive. You spend 7% on sales and to basically be competitive. That's 14%. You spend 4% on marketing. That was 18%. And then you had intellectual property costs. In the telecom business, so many people have patents, essential patents, that everybody collects a toll. And that could be anywhere between 5% to 13%.
On the patent that you're
That's
paying,
right.
essentially the royalty on that.
That's right. So if you're basically on the low end of the scale, you're doing okay. If you're on the high end of the scale, well, you're not making any money. Because if your gross margin is 30%, and we just calculated that you are at 18% and add another 10% to that, or even 8%, now you're at 26%.
Yep.
And if your gross margin is 30%, you got 4% at the bottom line. So any mistake can wipe that out. So it's
Wow.
very, very hard to be in business.
Wow.
Okay.
So it's a very tough hill to climb, and it can be very low margin. So like you're saying, you have to have scale. If let's say that is where you land at, let's say four to in the single digits, you really need to crank out units in order to survive.
Yeah, you need the economies of scale because that gives you purchasing price leverage. It gives you manufacturing leverage. It gives you the ability to afford what your distribution channels will charge. But brand matters equally, and the ecosystem matters. But so if you can dovetail into an ecosystem that's thriving and people adopt it, maybe it has legs.
Well,
And that's
but
and that's
go
what
ahead, Dave.
Elon had mentioned, that like they're trying to put something within that Tesla ecosystem. So I wonder if that might stick to that.
Yeah, I don't know at the moment. I haven't studied it, but it's a bold move. And today he doesn't have to build his own chipsets. He can get that from companies like Qualcomm or MediaTek. And there is an operating system from Android. You could use that, or you could build one yourself. It's going to be a little more expensive to do that, but you got to find a way to differentiate because there are some very competitive technologies out there. So you got to find something that's going to create a stickiness to stay on that ecosystem.
Well, I want to probe you on that because there are three players really today that are dominant. You look at the new players outside of Tesla that are really strong. Apple in 2007 they released the iPhone as we know it today. Samsung in 2010 released the Galaxy S, which marked their entry into the high end smartphone arena to try to compete with Apple. And now um, Huawei, which I would not have imagined if you said to me, if you and I were sitting at a cafe, 10 years ago, and you're like, Huawei, they serve just the Asian low end market. They'll never compete against Apple or Samsung. They introduced their version of a smartphone in 2016, the P9. Now enter Tesla with their Pi. Do you think, given these three very strong players, and probably we could have had the same conversation in 2005 when we were looking at the incumbents, do you think there is a path there for success for the Pi for Tesla?
It's possible. It's definitely possible. Depending on what their strategy is, right? And once you get the adoption, I mean, the key is to get the initial adoption,
Okay.
right? And once you get the initial adoption, a lot of things can happen. I mean, a classic example is I'll move away from uh, these three companies, but look at Geo in India. When they started, there were, I think, 8 operators in India. And within a ridiculously short time, they had like 100 million phones on their network.
Hmm.
And today they are the dominant network and the others are not around.
Wow.
And they are one of the few networks in the world that can make money on a $4.50 ARPU, which is crazy. So there are always disruptive models that, but I haven't studied this well enough to have an opinion.
Well, let me ask you about disruptive models, because one of the things that you shared with me is you can be let's just assume Elon found a way here to be disruptive, but you also said to me that when we spoke, and I'd love to see how much you can talk about this here with us, is that you were working with your team back in the Sony Ericsson days on something years ahead of the iPhone, but business decisions were made otherwise to go in a different direction. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think again, Niels Rydbeck had this vision about building a phone with a touchscreen, and we, along with Nokia and others, we formed this group called Symbian that built an operating system. It was a UK company. It was Scion, it was Nokia, Ericsson, Motorola that joined in, and we basically started Symbian. And they built a very nice operating system. And there were two versions. There was the one version which was one hand operated, and the other one which was touchscreen. In those days, it was stylus. You had to pick.
Yep.
You had to use a stylus because it was a resistive touch display. Capacitive screens were not available at that time. So Ericsson and Motorola both came up with two. Each of them came up with a touchscreen phone. Motorola came out with a phone called the Tai Chi, which was a very good phone. And later, at the same time, not later, same time, Ericsson came out with this full screen icon based product called the P900. It was first called the P800. The P900 had the color screen. And it was revolutionary. It was the best phone I've ever used. I actually have it on the wall behind me. And fast forward a few years later, and by the way, you could do email, you could type messages, you could do everything you wanted.
It was ahead of its time. I remember
Way
that
ahead
phone.
of its time. This was in 1999. Sorry, 2000, 2001. It was just the best phone ever. Actually, I stopped using it in 2006. It was that good. Okay.
Did it run out of network? What was it running off of? 3G?
No, I was forced actually by the company to change my phone because they wanted me to use another phone. But anyway, in 2000, I remember, sitting with when we formed Sony Ericsson, I was the CTO and I was sitting with my boss, and I tell the story in my book. My boss at that time was a very visionary guy. Again, I was fortunate first to work for Niels Rydbeck and then to work for Katsumi Ihara. Ihara-san was also brilliant and a very product-oriented guy. And we were sitting in a restaurant in London and chatting about, hey, roadmaps and cool ideas. And he told me, he said, Sandeep, the real killer app on the phone is the user interface. He said, the stylus is not good. Can you take the P900, make it a capacitive touch display? And we just shown the world with the T610 that we could do 65K colors.
Mhm.
The T28 was only 4K colors, but the T610 was 68K colors, or 68 colors, K colors. So I said, okay, let's go to the next generation. Let's get a really good color screen. And it's going to be capacitive. Use your fingers to navigate. And he said, go to Sony, go to Shinagawa. They've got a lab in Shinagawa is
In
near in
Japan.
Tokyo. Yeah. And he said, you go to one of the labs, and they've got a beautiful interface called the feel interface, where you drag and drop, you pinch, you scroll, you do all this thing with your fingers. And it was a genius interface. And said, okay, let's combine the two and make this phone a little thinner, right? And a little longer. And brilliant idea. Then I think, and this was way back in 2004. Okay. And, and I think for various business cost cutting reasons, we decided not to do it. Now, we were very successful with other phones, multimedia phones, which catapulted the revenue to 3 times what it was. But it was probably the biggest mistake we made, because it was the precursor to the iPhone, and it was proven, and we just didn't go ahead and do it.
So you had the killer, as you would say, the killer app, which in this case was the a touch screen
Yep.
that improved on the user interface that you already had, that was already proven.
Yeah.
That was by far, because I remember the stylus had to be pressed on the screen, and the
Yep.
pressing of the screen is what allowed it, instead of like with your finger today, where it recognizes that movement, right?
That's correct.
And so you come out, you come out with a product that's innovative. We're gonna kill it. Talk a little bit about that decision, because I think organizations, whether they're small or large, are always in this, especially if you're an organization that's in the products industry and you want to come out with something, that push and pull between what our R&D team has and what they've innovated, and the business unit that's making the dollars and cents on the launch of those products. What happens? This is a classic case of potential app killer, and then it gets shelved, and then now some innovator, boom, literally within a matter of 2 years, drops the hammer on everybody.
Yeah. I think the answer is really conviction and certain decisions. So if you look at the reason I admire Steve Jobs so much, is that he had conviction. You remember, he had sold over 400 million iPods, and he realized that the iPod had limited days, and he had to have the cellular connection, and that's how people were going to listen to songs.
Mhm.
So he transformed to the iPhone, even though he had a very successful iPod business. We, on the other hand, decided that maybe we didn't have the conviction to do this phone.
Interesting.
And a few years later, of course, Sony Ericsson bought the the touchscreen interface from Symbian called UIQ, but it's too late. And Steve Jobs understood that it was not just the user interface; he also needed to create that ecosystem and hook them on with all the applications. And so, if you look at what Apple's doing systematically, is creating more and more stickiness. Today, for example, if you look at Apple Pay, that's an additional level of stickiness.
Oh,
So
absolutely.
after some time, you basically find that you get used to certain things. You get used to Siri, you get used to Apple Pay, you get used to a number of things. And then you say, okay, switching is too difficult.
Yes. Well, then you're all in. It's
That's right.
it's it's very counterproductive. Not only that, but I remember a term that I had never heard of in my life up until when Apple introduced their iPhone, which was BYOD. That didn't exist when BlackBerry was the dominant phone, because it was the de facto device in the corporate world. There was no bring your own device.
That's right.
And as the iPhone grew traction in the consumer space, and people were like, oh my God, I love it. 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 CEOs were like, hey, IT, fix this. I want it. I want it. I want to use it for work. and there was a lot of resistance. But even still, with the IT being resistant, they said no, 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 no. Eventually, that all crumbled when third-party solutions came onto the scene to do BYOD. So you could have any. Essentially, it was the iPhone that was forcing that hand in order to happen, and that essentially, I would say, in my opinion, and you worked at BlackBerry, so you'd know, forced the it broke the monopoly that BlackBerry had on the corporate world as well as the government sector, which was a strong user here in the US of BlackBerry.
No, you're completely right, because what happened is it's exactly as you explained, Rolando. Um, what happened is that the appeal of this consumer device, it was both Apple's phone as well as Samsung phones, and what happened is nobody wanted to carry two devices. So the issue was mobile device management, and a number of firms came up with mobile device management, and they built.
MDMs. That's
Yeah,
right.
exactly. MDMs, they came up with this, and they were basically able to convince CIOs that, hey, on a single pane of glass, you could manage the other devices.
That's
And
right.
now people had an option, and the security paradigm was broken.
That
And
Bez server, boy, that was everywhere because I live right here outside of DC. So security is always, you hear it from all these agencies around here.
and
There's no way you could beat our Bez server, right?
it's probably true. BlackBerry had brilliant security, but at some point, when something is free, just good enough may be good enough.
You can't, it's hard to beat free, right?
It's very tough to beat free.
But yeah, you're absolutely right about stickiness and the iPhone. And I commend Jobs for being a visionary. And you said something, that a word that I love. I love the word curious, because um, curiosity opens the door to thoughts, ideas, and things that you weren't thinking about. So it made me think about, before we went on today, are there famous people or people we know that had this at their core or said stuff about curiosity? And actually, I found some. Albert, Albert Einstein famously said, I have no special talent. I'm only passionately curious. Walt Disney, he said, keep moving forward, opening new doors and doing new things because we're curious. Steve Jobs himself, he spoke at the commencement speech, the famous one he gave in Stanford, and spoke about the importance of curiosity and following one's own interest. And last, I got a few more, but I'll just make it short here. Bill Gates is known for his loving of reading and curiosity in problem solving and innovation. So, how do companies take this to the bank, this curiosity thing? How do they build it into their DNA? Is that something that's possible?
No, absolutely. In my book, I talk about building culture in companies. It's an entire chapter. And there is two parts to building culture. I call it raising the right army, which means changing behavior. And the other is leading that army. It all starts with a leader, right? And there are five characteristics I believe these leaders need to have. I
Interesting.
mean, one is clearly vision with conviction. The second is managerial courage. But I won't go into all of this. And the third one is leading by example. The fourth is the ability to communicate very clearly. And the fifth is curiosity to evolve. Then, if the leader has this curiosity to evolve, what they will do is periodically they will have sessions where they bring in their management and sometimes extended management and challenge every aspect of the business. Ask people to think out of the box. Ask them to think, where is the attack going to come from? Instill a certain sense of paranoia, and if you don't have that, you won't be curious enough to look. And if you are arrogant, the thing is, ignorance and arrogance is a very toxic combination. So one cannot basically have that, right? You have to basically believe that somebody is going to disrupt your business because there are so many clever people with clever ideas.
Hmm.
And you want to disrupt your own business before that happens. And unfortunately, I've talked about this controlled experiment that people do. And you and I spoke about it earlier, Rolando, on in the pre-call. And there's an experiment that executive coaches do, and they have people pass a basketball between two people, and all these executives are standing in pairs and passing a basketball at without dropping it, because that's the exercise. And a person in a gorilla suit runs across the room, and they ask everyone, "Hey, did you see the gorilla?" And nobody did, or very few did. But that's exactly what happens with disruption when you're consumed with your day-to-day work and you don't create time to actually think, how are you going to get disrupted and what are you going to do? And by the way, this disruption doesn't have to come only from technology. It can come in sales, it can come in marketing, it can come in business models, it can come in new financing schemes, so many ways. And so you have to be ready to look at that and challenge every aspect of your business regularly in order to build that curiosity. And once you do that, it becomes infectious and it gets viral.
I heard when I was coming out of college, I lived in Minnesota, so the backyard of 3M, and I interviewed there coming out of college. And one of the things that really impressed me about 3M was that they've invented, well, that's a lot of things that they've been inventing for years. But one of the things that it sounds a lot like what you just said, they've built it into the culture. I was told that they give on Fridays or different parts of the day of the week for different departments time to just think about products that could be developed, because the next great idea could come just as much from an engineer as somebody from sales. And they built in time into the week for people to have downtime and just think about what could be the next thing that 3M could come out with in order to have the next post-it notes, right? In order to, make improvements on the next version of post-it notes. So it's really interesting how some companies like 3M explicitly have it as part of their culture, and some, we know that some don't, and they don't last too long.
Yeah, at Ericsson, I always say the best company I've worked at my entire career was Ericsson. And it was in the 90s and early 2000s. It started in the late 80s. And what Ericsson did regularly was quite amazing. They would bring together 30, 40 people at off-site meetings regularly, 2-3 times a year. Okay, we'd meet and for 3 days. And we would break up into groups and think about all of the things. It was very structured. People would ask good questions where we had to answer, like, how is the business going to be disrupted? What are our consumers really asking for in our products? What will they ask for in a few years? How should our networks evolve? All of these things. So it's kind of interesting that, I still remember vividly that we had barely started working on 3G. This was 1994, 95, right? And we were working on 3G. Okay, 3G was coming out in like 2002, 3. But in 95, my team was already thinking about 4G. Wow. And this concept of doing OFDM over multiple antennas, and which people call MIMO today, we had thought of it already in 95.
1995. Hold up a second. Hold up a second, Sandeep. You know what? What? 1995? What? I can't believe that. That is an amazing thing. And look, if you've been in the telecom business like I have for over 20 years, you can understand and appreciate the fact that that is an amazing thing that way back then, almost 30 years ago, you all were working on that way ahead of anybody else.
And even there was more. I mean, there was a network team already thinking about how to make the core network completely packet based, right? And no longer circuit switch. Tremendous amount. No, because we had already implemented CDPD and Edge and all these things. So it was a natural evolution. So I think Ericsson really encouraged it. So it was a fabulous environment, And when we had recessions, they doubled down on the investment in R&D.
That's amazing.
And that was the culture that it was fascinating for a young engineer to be given that opportunity. Uh, and other companies, I'm sure, like Bell Labs did a lot too.
Bell
And
Labs. It's interesting. You're at that around time. You had Bell Labs, which eventually spun out and became Lucent. You had at that time also Nokia was getting their footing off the ground. You also mentioned Eric. It's almost like you guys were in a race, like a technology race. Uh, and one thing you said to me in the pre-call that really changed some of the dynamics on some of these companies was when domain or non-domain experts came into the picture at some of these companies and really changed the trajectory of what was. Because I would have thought if you'd have asked me in the early 2000s when we were also selling devices that were Ericsson based devices, oh, they're going to be around forever. Or Nokia, they're going to be around forever. They're going to be dominant. And that domain expertise, it seemed like from what you're telling me, wasn't what carried it over. That things changed as time started moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, my general opinion is if you have a technology company and its differentiation is technology evolution, then you need people running it to have domain expertise. Otherwise, they will not make the right decision and they will not know where to invest, right? And sometimes these technology companies are run by people with a very strong financial background, and um, they want to. You know, there's a different metric they optimize for,
Hmm.
and it always works in the short term, but doesn't work in the long term because you've not invested in the future.
Do you think that's why they brought Steve Jobs back after they let him go?
I think so, because I think that after some time there was, the financial engineering didn't work. You had to get a real engineer in place.
That's probably the classic case. There's other companies that have brought back founders or that were, they like Charles Schwab. He was let go. He was brought back in. Obviously, totally different sector, but it seems like founder-run companies. I've read this stat somewhere. Founder-run companies tend to be more sustainable, be around longer, and in some cases more profitable. So that's fascinating. I really love that word, domain expertise. Maybe you bring in a software guy or heavily, a spreadsheets guy. That's where he or she is most comfortable, but they may not be able to tap into that innovation expertise like somebody that is in that sector or in that industry.
Yeah, but you need to have very deep knowledge, right? So if you're running a phone business, you have to know about technology. You need to know about user needs. You need to know about how your market is evolving. You need to know brand. You need to know distribution, how to handle your supply chain. So if you can't dot the I's and cross the T's and across all these, that you don't have the domain expertise because you will miss something and you'll get disrupted. And I think that's why finding CEOs with that broad expertise is hard.
Hmm.
And that is why so many companies are in trouble because very often, uh, you know, they just don't know the different plays they can create in order to win.
Well, I want people that listen to this podcast and are listening to your voice to win more. And I don't want them to miss something, as you just stated. So that's why, Ori, give us the top 3 secrets.
Well kept secrets, gotta keep them safe and sound well. But secrets are just like diamond.
Sandeep, we were talking earlier about some of the secrets. Some of these come straight from your experience and from your book. And I want you to share these secrets that you've learned in life in working all these prestigious companies, working with fabulous people. Or go ahead and put the graphic there on number 1. You said building a really good company. What's the secret to building a really good company?
So, I mean, this is the topic of my book. And there are 8 elements that are very essential to building a really good company. You start with picking the right business model, and it has to be a sticky business model. Second, you've got to build a foundation that generates cash, and it is cash that helps you basically grow your business. And then you need a strategy, and the strategy encompasses the entire company. But the strategy in itself is not good enough. Uh, you have to have some protective towers around the strategy. If in my example, I talk about a company as a castle, and the strategy is the perimeter wall. And the protective towers are product creation, product delivery, sales channels, and execution. And together they form a very strong bond. And and then the next element that you have to look at is the culture. And
Okay.
in my example, I call it the keep of the castle, because if the keep fell, the castle fell. The culture is the most important in a company. And Peter Drucker said that culture eats strategy for breakfast.
Wow.
And
Wow. That's a strong statement.
that's right. So strategy is what you desire to get done, right? That's what you want to get done. But culture determines what you actually get done. So if you don't align culture with strategy, invariably your strategy will fall. So building culture is super important.
So, like what
And
you were
then,
saying earlier, which is, you know, being able to look in the rear mirror, see who's going to try to eat your lunch. That's part of the culture, right? Being paranoid, if that's part of the culture. If it's a mindset of how do we take these products to the next level? How do we beat our competition with a distribution channel that's better than the others? These are all elements of that culture. Is that right?
absolutely. And it's basically building that desire to win,
Mm.
right?
Win,
And
win,
then
win.
yeah, and the last element in this first point was stakeholder confidence. Your stakeholders are your investors, your employees, and your customers. And you have to have that confidence if you want to win. So, this is what I explain in how to build a really good company. And I talk about successes and failures and a lot of recipes with a lot of examples from a number of companies around the world that I think should make a lot of sense.
Awesome. Awesome. I love that. I love that people can actually digest the examples that you put in your book. And I definitely would recommend folks check that out. And then one of those things that aligns well with having a company, like you're saying, culture is directly related to people. And that's, I would say, in your number two secret is then building yourself to run those companies, or essentially the people, aligning the people so that they can um, run those companies and make it a really good company. I believe that was your second secret, or you could put that up on screen.
Yeah, that's true. Uh, you know, um, after all, people are the biggest and best asset, most important asset in a company, and so is the leader, because the leader sets the pace. And I say this in many podcasts. Joel Arthur Barker, the futurist, had a beautiful definition of who a leader is, and it's the best definition I've seen. He contrasted a manager and a leader, and he said a manager is one who manages within a paradigm,
Hmm.
and a leader is one who manages between paradigms.
Hmm.
So when you want to manage between paradigms, you need to have certain attributes and characteristics. Now, everyone's journey is slightly different, and so it's personal. But I believe that there are some things that are very important to build yourself in order to run a company. And one is you have to have the ability to dream, and dream with conviction. Okay, to do things that you think will happen, and do that with that conviction. When I started in mobile phones in 1984, I read about it and I wanted to do a PhD in it. And everyone told me, hey, why do you want to do this? There's everyone saying that there'll be 1 million phones sold in the year 2000 and they're huge and bulky. But I was convinced that as all technology evolves, it'll become an indispensable tool for human communication. And I'm glad I went into it. despite all the naysayers. But and it
Well,
worked
look
out.
at where it is today. Look, think
Absolutely.
about back in your days, 94, 96, 97.
Yeah, this was 84.
Well, even 84. Okay, let's just go further back. Nobody could have envisioned that something like this would be part of our daily life, in our pockets, and essential. BlackBerry servers went down. People went flipping out because they couldn't get their emails.
Yep.
And if your iPhone, all of a sudden the network went down because of a power outage, you're like in panic. Oh, I can't get. So something like that being so essential, it's amazing that technology is so it's part of the fabric of life today. Like, you can't imagine being without it. But I want to jump into the next piece because this is kind of a good segue. Yes, I can't imagine not having my device on my hip, but that can also have a downside, which is maybe I'm too stressed out because every single notification and message is coming through there, on top of what life has its own challenges. And you were going to let us know, how can we avoid some of the downsides of being stressed out, maybe from technology, maybe from other aspects of life and running a corporate environment.
Before I say that, just to complete the thought on bullet number 2,
Yeah,
there are
go for
six
it.
other things. There were 6 other things that you need to, what I think are important. One is get out of your comfort zone as often as possible to test yourself. Learn to deal with adversity. Learn from your success and failures. Get battle tested. Be curious, and always stay true. Don't try to be something you're not. And then going to the third point, which you said uh, about stress. Everyone who's got a busy corporate life and works very long hours, there's invariably a certain amount of stress.
Indeed.
And I have a story that I've actually written about. I
Go ahead, please.
And it was a Russian painter actually narrated the story, and I was in the audience. And it's a beautiful story. It says there was a hunter who was in the forest, and in the forest he saw a priest, a monk, dancing away with glee. And the hunter was surprised, and he said, "Hey," he talked to the monk, and he said, "Shouldn't you be in prayer and penance?" And the monk told him, he told the hunter, "Can you string your bow and shoot that tree which is 200 yards away?" And the hunter did so. And then he said, "Hey, can you shoot it 300 yards away?" And the hunter did so. Now he said, 500 yards away, can you shoot? And the hunter said, "Well, if I stretch my bow that much, it'll break."
Mm.
And the monk smiled and walked away. Okay, so the moral of the story is the monk was dancing, okay, to release his all of his pent up maybe stress, right? And similarly, so the story is that every day, right, find something that you can do that's fun, and I normally work between 12 and 14 hours a day, and at least I used to. I probably keep a similar schedule, but what I try to do is every day I try to do a few things that I really enjoy. Okay, and that takes the edge off.
Like what? Tell us. Like what?
I like every morning when I get up and I get coffee, the first thing I do is I do a cryptic crossword, right?
Okay.
And I try to get on the leaderboard. Not often.
You're a
But
competitor. Yes,
I know.
that's what that tells me.
But it's fun because it takes my mind off everything. And for that short period, I'm just focusing on this and nothing else, right? And then of course I give myself enough time to do some reading and getting up to date on things, And normally I love cricket, so I record a match or two and watch it in the evening when I come back to relax. And so if you can break your day up into chunks and you can basically spend a little time doing the things you like, you actually reset. And then of course the other thing is I would suggest, I try to basically remain fairly fit. Now, I don't mean I can't lift large weights or I'm not a triathlete or anything
Oh,
like
so
that.
you're not into CrossFit? You're not a
No,
CrossFitter?
no, I'm too small. But anyway, but I basically, uh, what I try to do is I try to stay fit and I control what I eat, right? So I've kept my weight for 35, 40 years. So it
Nice.
keeps me fit and it keeps my mind fit. And that's
Isn't
what
that
I
what
recommend.
don't they say that about the Fortune 500 CEOs that like the vast majority of them have that one common denominator, whether they're male or female, younger or older, is that they find time to be physically active and do some form of exercise.
Yeah, I think it's both the physical aspect as well as the mental aspect, and you've got to be fairly relaxed in your mind to make good decisions. If you are perpetually stressed, then you're probably in the wrong job,
Mm.
right?
Indeed, indeed, and as we know, stress, especially over sustained over a long period of time, leads to all kinds of nasty results on the mind and the body.
I
So,
agree. I agree. I've had a simple rule. In any job where I felt I couldn't succeed despite my best effort, I just left.
mm,
No regrets. No regrets. I don't blame anyone. It just said, hey, this ain't for me.
wow. Well, go ahead, Dave.
Sandeep, you know what? We never called out the title of your book, so I apologize. I just want to call that out. And I really like the title. The title of your book is Your Company is Your Castle. And that resonates with me. Rolando, who created Global Tech 21 years ago, over
21.
20 years ago, he's often said, when we're talking strategy, talks about building a moat, so that our competitors can't come to us. And I think Rolando, I mean, do you consider your company your castle? I mean,
Heck
making
yeah.
references like that, I would think
Heck
so.
yeah. This I love the name of that book too, because the phrase building a moat was something that I took from working at Altria, also known as Philip Morris, a Fortune 100 company, and they talked about that all the time when I was there. And I took that mindset in when I started Global Tech. What is our moat? What's our differentiator? What are we doing to separate ourselves from the competition? And I loved what you said, Sandeep, about being paranoid. I'm paranoid almost every day. It to me, even even though it's not so, I always feel like there's a day that our competition is just knocking at the door and they're prying in and seeing what we're doing. It to me, that's kind of my mindset, even though I know that's not the truth, but I kind of operate under that kind of philosophy because it keeps you sharp. Like, wow, they're right on our heels. They're right behind us. They're right behind me. We better get going. We better do this. Otherwise, they're going to take over and pass us. So I really love that you said that that's part of one of the core tenets of great companies.
Absolutely.
So, Sandeep, if people really want to nerd out on your book, where could they find it? Could they go to Amazon and check it out, or where should they go get this book?
Yeah, so it's on Amazon. It's in a hardcover version. There's the Kindle version, and there is also an audiobook. So, depending on your preference, you can get the book. Uh,
And we have it for those that are watching on the video. It is 5-star ratings on Amazon. And I got to tell you, Sandeep, we sell products on Amazon. We know how difficult it is to maintain a 5-star rating on Amazon. And the book is 5-star rated. So you're going to get a really good book that a lot of other people have also written very meaningful, well thought out reviews. So if you want to go check it, it's called Your Company is Your Castle, Proven Methods for Building a Resilient Business. Anything else you want to leave us with, Sandeep? Any other thoughts?
Not really. I mean, you've asked me a lot of questions, and it's been a fun 35-year career. I have had the fortune, I've been really fortunate in my life to have been picked it's strange because I really never, except for my very first job, which I got by calling someone, right? And the person invited me for an interview after the call, right? And then once I got the job, they said, "Can you basically send in your resume?"
Hmm.
And so almost every job I got, I sent my resume after I was hired. And so
Reality.
it's an odd situation. And I've been very fortunate that wonderful people have given me an opportunity. And I've also had the fortune of having phenomenal mentors, like I mentioned some on this
Yep.
podcast. And but the most is that I've had the best employees in the world, co-workers. They were co-workers more than anything else, and without them, I would never have seen the successes I saw, which is why I dedicated the book to them.
Oh, fascinating. Fascinating. I love that. That's a great story. You were sharing with me how you got the job at BlackBerry. And you weren't even, it wasn't, you weren't even at Sony Ericsson and they plucked you out and you went to BlackBerry. You were doing your own thing. You're an independent consultant to them. Talk about that and how you ended up getting the job at BlackBerry.
Yeah, actually, when I came back from Sweden, I came to Austin and I was at Freescale, which was sold to private equity. And after a few years, I decided, I had done a few turnarounds and I said, why don't I go into business for myself and become a consultant? And I have a consulting company called RSI Consulting. R stands for research and restructuring, and S stands for strategy, and I stands for innovation. So I had five multinational clients who basically I was helping them do interesting things. Wonderful 5 years. And during that, I was invited by in some investors, along with two of my colleagues, to take a look at BlackBerry. This was in 2013, and help formulate a plan, assess and formulate a plan as to what can be done to revive it.
Hmm.
And one thing led to another. I was a consultant for over a year, and and then I joined the company. They had actually, the CEO asked me and said, "Hey, we'd love you to join." And so I said, "You've got these five small businesses that why don't you allow me to work with them?" I thought that they were unpolished gems,
Mm.
and so I had the opportunity, and thanks to my incredible employees, right, we were able to convert those five businesses into the cash cow for the company.
Wow.
And today, that portion of the business is probably being spun out. But what I read from the press, because I haven't been in the company for almost 6 years, so um, that's what I read in the press. So
And
it,
didn't you said to me at one point they weren't generating, they weren't as profitable prior to you coming on and turning some of that around, and that after you were there, you not only met the metrics that they were looking for, but blew them out of the water.
well, I can't take. It's difficult for me to take credit.
I know
Uh, you
you're a
know,
humble guy. I know you're a humble guy, but you were
I
leading
want
the ship there for a little bit, a period of time that.
No, I think no. I had a division. I had a division. There's a CEO, and he's a very very influential and senior person with a terrific track record. When he was hired into the company, he gave me the opportunity and freedom to run my business. And at that time, BlackBerry wasn't doing well because we were transitioning from phones to software and services, and so we were bleeding. And once that ship was righted, I was given this opportunity to run these five businesses, and thanks to my incredible employees and what they were able to do, we were able to convert my division into a major cash cow for the company.
Terrific. That's just awesome. That is just awesome. And maybe, maybe putting some words in your mouth, maybe save the company, especially if they were if they were in the red. Who knows how long investors would have been holding on until they hit the sell button. Um,
I can't take credit for that. I'm sorry. I think I think any turnaround is done by more than one person, and it's a collective effort. I think would be disingenuous if I said it's one person, but it's a collective effort, and that's why I think that I've had incredible employees, and I've thanked them.
Well, Sandeep, you've said it so well. You've said it so eloquently. I could have spent another 2 hours just picking your brain because there's just such an infinite amount of wisdom and knowledge there that we could have shared with our audience. But I want to thank you for coming on today. And if people want to follow you or check you out, where should they go?
On LinkedIn is the best. You can friend me on LinkedIn, and in the contact section, you have my email address, and you can send me a message, and we can connect, and then take it from there.
Well, it truly has been an honor for me to have you on today. Because some of these solutions are solutions that I sold in the early days of global tech and prior to that, and so talking to somebody that had a hand in bringing some of these toys and some of these solutions to the market it's just for me, it's just a great pleasure to have you and have this discussion with you today. So thank you for coming on, Sandeep.
Thank you, Rolando. Thank you, Dave.
Thanks.
It's been a pleasure and a privilege.
Awesome. And so we've been talking to Sandeep, and if you want to nerd out more on this type of topic and you want to learn how to get operational excellence, Dave and I covered 2 podcasts on this, as well as hidden signals inside of business you may not be aware of that can cause problems if you're not paying attention to them. You can check those episodes out on Apple or Spotify or wherever you consume your podcast. And Dave and I will see you in those episodes. All right. Now, for those that are on YouTube, I want to thank you for tuning in today. Dave and I have these videos right up here on the screen that we will join you in, where we will drop some more knowledge with some valuable, important guests. Check those out. Dave and I will meet you there. See you in a bit.